Today, we are three of the most popular grow mediums: Living Soil, Peat Moss, and Coco Coir, to help you make the best decision for your next grow. Hey, but before we do, today's video is brought to you by Real Growers Grow Dots, the easiest way to feed your high-value plants. You mix grow dots in once at the beginning of your grow, and they feed your plants all the way to harvest. You don't have to worry about nutrient burn or nutrient lockout. Grow Dots does all the hard work for you. Check them out over at realgrowers.com. And while you're there, use coupon code Scotty420 to get 20% off your first order. Now let's get back to the show. Come on, High C, let's jump into this one.
All right, man. So you mentioned Living Soil,
Yep.
Peat Moss, and Coco. Before we jump into it, these are pretty much like the go-to mediums for people to grow in.
Yeah, they're super popular. Some people are using deep water culture or rock wool, but very few. These are the popular ones. These are the ones I'd recommend anyhow.
Okay, so let's start off with Living Soil.
Yeah.
And when we say soil, we're not just talking about like dirt that you grab from outside.
Like dirt or soil, outside soil is like degraded rock and degraded organic materials, a little bit of, tree roots or whatever that give aeration. We're not doing that exactly, but we are taking a line from that. We're trying to emulate that, but we're not just going to go get any rock. We're going to go get soft rock phosphate or langbonite. There's just different things that you can get and components you can put in there. That's where you're going to get your nutrients from. Those rocks have macronutrients, and they're going to slowly be weathered, whether it's in nature over millions of years, or we're going to take this rock dust and we're going to weather it quickly with microbes. We're going to get that into the plant.
Gotcha. And when I think of Living Soil, correct me if I'm wrong, the first name that comes to my mind is Build a Soil. Is that a Living Soil?
Now he sells you the components, so you can take. He's got that rock phosphate, and then he's got the langbonite that has potassium in it, and azomite is one that has all the micronutrients in it, calcium and magnesium and all that stuff. So you're going to take that, you're going to build your soil with that, and you take maybe, I think it's like 30%. Compost, 30% some kind of a starter material like cocoa or peat. Neither of those are just, so it is a little bit different. And then you got aeration. Normally you'd have your roots would be rotting out and keeping it aerated in the natural soil. So we need aeration. So we're going to use like pumice or perlite or something like that. That's what a living soil, usually a third.
And this particular approach to the medium or media, I always get confused on which one to use.
One's singular and one's plural, that's all.
So this approach usually appeals to more like organic growers?
Very much so. Okay. This is a really cool organic way. This is the way nature does it, where it slowly grabs that nutrition from the rock. And it's really cool. I've talked to people, it's not my style by any means, but I've talked to people that are on their 12th, 13th, or 14th run with the same soil. And the idea is you just keep on adding nutrients. The nutrient usually comes from the rock dust, or the compost is where a lot of the nitrogen comes from. So you keep on adding fresh compost, fresh, organic inputs, and the soil just keeps on producing for you. Yeah, to have a dozen runs out of some living soil isn't crazy at all. It's cool.
All right, so let's talk about difficulty of this, because to me, when I hear about it, it seems like it's probably a little bit more difficult to pull off than some of the other ways to grow.
You're talking to a guy that invented the open the bag and pour it in and mix it and you're done. So yeah, this is the opposite of that. This is a hobby. You want to know what you're doing here. You're going to say, hey, look, what's the earthworm castings? What are they for? Okay, I want to use those in some of my compost. Oh, I want to get this azomite. I'm going to get this volcanic rock dust and play with this. There's all these components that you can build. You can buy the name brand azomite, or you can buy volcanic rock dust from another continent. It's all, really fun. There's a lot of variables to play with, so it makes a really fun hobby. There's a lot of variables to play with, so you can mess it up, though.
So let's talk about that, because I know that one of the things that people complain about growing with this particular method is if they notice a deficiency in their plants.
Yeah. Organic materials have to be broken down, and they're broken down microbially, and then they're into the plant. They're assimilated into the plant, but the microbes are the intermediary there. So it takes some time. So if you notice nitrogen or we'll say a potassium deficiency, whatever, you've got to now get that whatever, langbeinite or rock phosphate, whatever it is, you've got to solubilize that. It's in this rock form. The microbes need to solubilize it and then introduce it into the plant. It's not as instant as taking some Epsom salts and pouring it on and coming back the next day and having your magnesium deficiency fixed. The living soil definitely appeals to a certain type of person. It's natural, it's sustainable, it's beautiful. It's how the earth has worked. It is really cool stuff. It's just not for me.
Okay, cool. Let's move on to the next one. That's
Sure.
a pretty popular option.
Sure.
Peat moss.
Yeah.
What is it and where does it come from?
It's comes from the ground. They buy when I would drive over to my bamboo nursery, I would see them mining peat, and they're just digging. It's this layer of the earth that has just a ton of organic material. It's been compressed with time and pressure and a little, just over, I think, millions of years, I'll say. Ooh. Yeah, it's a non-renewable resource. Once it's gone, and they mine it. It is a mined product, so not super clean, and yeah, it's not super sustainable either.
So why do people like growing with peat moss? What are some of the pros of growing with peat moss?
It has a bunch of organic material in there, or it is organic, and theoretically organic. It's not man-made, but it holds a lot of water. Peat has great moisture retention capability. So if you're planting in peat, you probably won't have to water as frequently.
Okay. Speaking of water, I've heard that you can also run into some problems though growing with peat and using your water.
Sure. Yeah, it's a little bit tricky. So they call it being hydrophobic. If you let it dry out, we like to do dry back sometimes. Mm-hmm. If you let it dry out too much and then you go water it, the water will just run off it. Like you have to slowly get it to absorb the water again. Has this where they call it hydrophobic. It's scared of water. But yeah, you'll see you've got to be on your watering because it's a pain in the butt to actually have to slowly re-wet it. And it's just performance downgrade big time.
And then you say it holds a lot of water. Immediately, I think, well, does that mean I'm more susceptible to things like root rot?
Yeah, you sure are. If you screw up, if you got your outdoors or at a nursery, I'm thinking sprinklers going on or your automatic irrigation going on. Yeah, it's much easier to overwater with peat. It's a double-edged sword. It holds a lot of water. But for what we're doing, indoors, or we're really babying these plants, we water them multiple times a day or however much we want. Yeah, it's a little bit tricky there.
Okay, I might have misheard you. Help me understand this. It does come from the ground.
Yes.
And usually when I think of stuff that comes from the ground, it's got minerals, it's got nutrients in it. Is that the case with peat?
No, peat's inert. It's considered inert. Might have very little amounts of nutrient in there, but no. That's what's cool about it is it's a blank slate for you to work with.
So I'm in control of all the nutrients.
You're in control.
All right, inside joke. Okay, let's move on to the last one. You mentioned Coco Coir. This is the one that I'm the biggest fan of. Explain what cocoa is and where it comes. It's in the name. What's Coco Coir?
It's the husk of coconuts. They've got coconut water. I've got a bunch of them in the fridge over there. They've got the coconut meat. There's a whole industry, coconut industry. And what they figured out is what to do with the waste product, which is the fiber. And it turns out it makes great planting material. Or not turns out, nature knows what it's doing. It drops all those coconuts, and then coconut is a seed. So it's giving itself its own planting material. We're able to take that. It's a byproduct of the coconut industry and use it to grow in. And does it work good. The first time I found out about it, it totally changed the way I grow.
So let's talk about some of the pros of Coco Coir.
Absolutely.
What's if you said the one thing that you love the best about it, what would that be?
The water retention capabilities of it. You're able to water it. You can water it to the point where it's really wet to run off. And then if you come back and water it the next day, you're not going to get root rot. It holds. As long as it's not sitting in water, it holds the perfect amount of air. It's got a great air to water ratio, and it's so helpful when you're maybe not the most experienced grower. Root rot is a huge problem that comes from overwatering. It zaps the life out of your plant. It's hard to do that with Coco Coir.
You mentioned sitting in water.
Sure.
I use the real buckets, sip buckets.
Yep.
And it does sit, but it's just a little bit of it sitting in that water, and it seems to be like the perfect wicking system.
Yeah, there's a reason why we use that float valve and just put 1.5 inches of water in there. If it's sitting in that little bit, it's got these great moisture retention capabilities, or wicking capabilities. It's really cool stuff.
So we've talked a lot about the pros of Coco Coir.
Sure.
I also know that we've ran into a couple of issues with Coco Coir.
Yeah.
What's going on?
It has to be properly washed and buffered. Yeah, you can hold on to calcium and magnesium and potassium, cause deficiencies there. So you got to make sure it's properly buffered. Washing it comes from areas where they float them down the rivers, brackish water or salt water. So there's always a bunch of salt. You got to make sure that's been neutralized and washed out. So there's a huge difference in cocoa quality, definitely.
Yeah, and I'm going to give a shout out, not a sponsor of the show, but Canna Coco. They make some amazing Coco Coir.
Yes, they do. And that's when I really learned about it. I needed some help with my grow. My deep water culture wasn't going so good. Walked into the store that my buddy owns.
And then a last point. Cocoa, like peat, is inert. You're in charge of all of the nutrients.
Exactly. Which is really cool for what we're doing, whether I'm putting dots on there or putting some A and B on there. It is nice that I have a blank slate to work with. Cocoa is easy to flush out at the end. So, and it just holds the right amount. No matter how much water you put in there, it still holds a good amount of air, which is so great for what we're doing.
And the last thing that I really like about it is if I'm over here and I say, Scott, what's wrong with my plants? And you say, oh, you need this. Unlike living soil, I can just add a little bit of what I need and I'm good to go.
Yeah, there's an immediate response there. It goes into the cocoa, gets uptaken by the plant immediately, but that's just because of the synthetic nutrients, yeah.
All right. Okay, I'm going to take it back to the very beginning.
Yeah.
One benefit, though, from organic or living soil that we don't get with peat or with cocoa is those microbes. And I think that that's a big reason why a lot of people go with the living soil.
And that's not true. That is, nature fills a vacuum. So whether it's peat or whether it's cocoa, there's going to be microbes on there. There's going to be microbes that want to grow on there. If it's too wet, you're going to get those microbes that don't need air, anaerobic microbes, the one that rot things. We don't want that. We want to keep it nice and aerated so we get those aerobic microbes that cycle nutrients for us. So nature will fill that vacuum. It's how we want to do it, though.
Okay, so last point before we're out of here.
Right.
If I want to make sure I'm not filling that vacuum with bad microbes, I've heard of organic compost tea.
Yeah.
And then also something sitting right behind you actually on the shelf.
Oh, you're tempting me to say recharge, right? Yeah, that's what you do. You fortify these things. You fortify the soils with the bacteria that you want. You bring those starter colonies in there with something like living soil. If you're using synthetic nutrients, something like Coco Coir or peat, you're revitalizing, you're adding microbes every week or so like that. But it's the same thing, man. You're definitely getting microbes in there.
All right, man.
But that's just my 2 cents. I grow in Coco Coir. I love using recharge and grow dots and making it simple. But what about you? What media do you use? Let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, please hit that like button, smash that subscribe button, share this video with another grower you know, and check out the other couple of videos YouTube's recommending. I think you'll dig them.